An important legal principle that we have informed consent, fully informed consent for life-altering medical procedures. And are you then suggesting that it was not really full informed consent?
I mean, no matter how much information they would have given me, as a child, I just would not have been able to consent to this. And my parents were required to sign off on these, but it was under duress. I don't think it was really consent. It was coercion. They were given the false dichotomy of either a child transitions or she dies. But transition almost killed me.
That clip was not a debate, it was an exposure. Democrats spent years chanting, "Trust the science." And then a young woman sits there and tells Congress she was chemically altered as a child without real consent, without real warnings, and with drugs never approved for that use. And suddenly, silence, lip-biting, and legal gymnastics. Republicans asked the hard questions, protected kids, and pulled the curtain back on a system that's been experimenting on minors. If that shook you even a little, hit like, subscribe, and stay right here. Let's watch the full clip before I give you the full breakdown.
Thank you. Thank you for yielding. Quick question for Mr. Mentor. You yourself transitioned at age 35 and not as a child, correct?
That is correct. I wish I'd been able to do so earlier.
All right. Ms. Cole, I want to thank you again for being here today and for sharing your powerful testimony, especially on your 19th birthday. And that has been very helpful to us.
Thank you, sir.
I want to acknowledge what you said earlier, tearfully. I mean, it was appropriate. Everyone here, as you said, our hearts go out to everybody. The families, everybody affected. We're trying to strike the right balance, and we do believe Congress has a role here. And I appreciate your testimony for providing evidence of that. And I wanted to ask you first about your parents' involvement in your transition process, and then ask you about some of the hormone treatments you underwent, because I think all that's important. First, were you or your parents informed of the long-term effects of the procedures and hormones that you were subjected to?
We had consent forms with a list of some of the side effects, and we did do consultations where we did speak about some of them, but it was in very vague terms. And I mean, as a child, it was a lot for me to process because, I mean, I was perfectly healthy, and children tend to think that they're invincible, that nothing can get them. And with all these things being listed, it was hard to know which of these I would experience. And most of the side effects that I experienced, most of the ones that I'm experiencing today, actually, were not even listed on these forms, so I had no idea. And children just don't know what permanence is because they've only been in the world for so many years.
It's an important legal principle that we have informed consent, fully informed consent for life-altering medical procedures. And are you then suggesting that it was not really full informed consent?
I mean, no matter how much information they would have given me, as a child, I just would not have been able to consent to this. And my parents were required to sign off on these, but it was under duress. I don't think it was really consent. It was coercion. They were given the false dichotomy of either a child transitions or she dies. But transition almost killed me.
And the evidence suggests that that is a common practice, regardless of what's been said here today. And there's some other things that are very disturbing. One aspect of the current child movement about, this sex change movement that's particularly pernicious is the so-called off-label medications. One that's well known as leuprolide acetate, or it's commonly known as Lupron, to chemically alter boys and girls. Not by surgery, but chemically. It's
Yes.
the same thing. There's a long list of pharmaceutical drugs that medical personnel across the country are using to, for example, shut off the testosterone production in young boys to make them more feminine looking, or to shut off the estrogen production in young girls to make them more masculine looking. So I'm going to say for the record, post-hearing, we have 5 days. I'll enter some of the articles that detail a list of these chemical drugs being used on children for purposes that are not approved by the FDA. But Ms. Cole, was one of those puberty blockers that you were prescribed Lupron?
Yes, I was put on Lupron.
And what was the purpose of that in your hormone treatment?
Just to stop the natural production of my hormones to make way for the exogenous testosterone.
Does it concern you, as it does us, that some pharmaceuticals are being used to chemically mutilate some children today that were never explicitly approved for that purpose by the FDA?
Incredibly so.
And to my knowledge, there's currently no effort underway by the FDA to explicitly approve these pharmaceuticals for these purposes.
And they shouldn't.
And they shouldn't. The time's expired for the time that was yielded to me, and I thank the chairman, and now I recognize myself for my 5 minutes finally, so I'll keep going here. The last time I checked, it was still illegal under federal law to use FDA-approved pharmaceuticals for an unapproved or off-label use, and yet we're seeing that very commonly in this field. Ms. Cole, do you find it concerning that medications that were used on you or on countless other children across the country for a reason contrary to the original purpose they were approved for, you've said that's something that concerns you, disturbs you, it shouldn't be allowed, right?
Very much so.
Ms. Mailman, let me go to you. There's been a lot of talk here in recent few minutes about legal precedents, et cetera. I saw you sort of biting your lip as some of that was presented. I'll give you a moment here to refute any of that or respond to it, if you will.
Right, well, we've heard a lot about the parents' rights to put drugs into their kids, which the Sixth Circuit has just very recently said that there is no Supreme Court case that extends this idea of parental rights to a general right to receive new or experimental drug treatments. And in general, this idea of substantive due process would strip people, would strip parents, would strip voters, would strip doctors of a say and push all of those decisions into our courts, which are not medical experts. So as the Sixth Circuit also recently said, life-tenured federal judges should be wary of removing a vexing and novel topic of medical debate from the ebbs and flows of democracy by construing a largely unamendable federal constitution to occupy the field. So that is what people are asking for. They're asking for judges to create medical law rather than voters informed by medical science.
That's right, and I think you've touched on a really important issue here, and it's one that's been discussed a little bit today, and that is, Mr. McClintock said it eloquently, we're conservatives, we're limited government conservatives, right? We obviously recognize that parents have a natural and fundamental right to the upbringing of their children, to make decisions with regard to their care and custody and control, but at the same time, our legal system in this country, our law, does not allow a parent to physically or mentally abuse or harm a child, right? So what we're all trying to do here in a very reasoned way is to strike the balance, to make sure that we're not doing life-altering harm to young people who are not prepared for that. And in some of the states, like in California, Mr. McClintock's home state, they are pushing the parents out of the room, and they're doing this without their consent, and that is alarming, and it should be obviously unlawful. Let me switch the subject here. If doctors are using chemical castration drugs in an off-label fashion, that is for a purpose other than what they were approved for by the FDA, should doctors face legal consequences? What do you think about that?
So that is subject to medical malpractice charges. Also, states regulate the practice of medicine. So states are perfectly entitled to regulate what drugs that people can access themselves. And if you can regulate what people can access themselves, obviously that would confer to the child as well. Unfortunately, I think you're seeing this movement that states should not be able to regulate the practice of medicine and somehow federal judges should. But absolutely, medical malpractice suits should be available here. Unfortunately, you've seen the politicization of medical associations creating standards that are then informing doctors. And so I think that what this body could and should do is make sure that there are research, that there is science that are informing states so that their medical boards can make better decisions.
That's well said. Early in my legal career, I did medical malpractice defense, as was one of the areas, and the medical standard was a big thing. We had medical review panels in the state of Louisiana, as most states do, and they would look to the medical standard, and if the standard itself is not fully informed by studies that back it up, we have a broad-scale concern here. Can you define quickly, changing subjects, what a sanctuary state is in context of gender transition procedures for children?
So California has bragged that it is a sanctuary state as far as gender transition for minors. It has SB 107. There are copycat bills being introduced in other states, and it has two main provisions. One is that if a child goes to California to have a gender procedure, the California courts will take over the custody proceedings. So one parent can take a child away from their other parent, and then the California court can assert jurisdiction. That's one provision. The second provision is that in California, they will not give over any medical information if it relates to another state's transgender procedure laws. So California is priding itself on ripping families apart when you would think that if they have 170,000 homeless people living in the state, that they would focus on the benefits and improving the lives of Californians.
That's very well said, and in 7 seconds, I can't do any justice to any of you asking another question. I want to thank you all sincerely. This is an important hearing, and it was not an easy one for anybody, but it's a really important issue that we have to wrestle with on both sides of the aisle and in every state across the country, and many legislatures are doing that right now. And in my view, some are doing some really important work. So we have to determine what we're going to do at this level, and so your testimony, all of you, your testimony today was valuable for that purpose. This concludes,
I have
one more.
one more UC. Thank you. Article entitled California Bill
Now
on
that
Youth.
you've seen the full exchange, there's no spinning this. The Republican lawmakers were absolutely right, and they were right for one simple reason. They listened to reality instead of ideology. A woman who transitioned later in life and a detransitioner who was put on puberty blockers as a child both told Congress the same thing. Children cannot consent to life-altering medical decisions, no matter how many forms you shove in front of them. That's not politics, that's common sense. What Democrats want you to ignore is the most damning part of this hearing. The drugs. Lupron, puberty blockers, chemical castration drugs used off-label, never approved by the FDA for this purpose, handed to kids whose brains aren't even done developing. And when Republicans asked whether that should have legal consequences, suddenly the follow-the-science crowd pivoted to, well, it's complicated. No, it's not. If a doctor did this in any other context, it would be malpractice. Period. The hypocrisy was on full display. Democrats claim to defend parental rights, yet support policies that push parents out of the room, hide medical records, and let states like California literally take custody of children who are brought there for gender procedures. That's not compassion. That's government-sanctioned family separation. And the fact that California brags about being a sanctuary state for this while drowning in homelessness tells you exactly where their priorities are. Republicans handled this the right way, measured, serious, and grounded in law. They acknowledged parents' rights while drawing a firm line against abuse and irreversible harm. They didn't scream, didn't posture, didn't virtue signal. They asked the questions Democrats don't want asked, because the answers are devastating to the narrative. This hearing made one thing painfully clear. One side is trying to protect children from permanent damage, and the other side is trying to protect an ideology at all costs. And when real people start telling the truth about what happened to them, that ideology starts to crumble fast.